Alright, so I went ahead and took apart my leaf springs and all the bushings, removed the leaf springs themselves, and I know there's some guys out there who are thinking about doing this themselves, so I just wanted to make a quick video and kind of just quickly explain how I did it, some of the changes that I would have done to make it easier, and just to share it with you guys and kind of make your own decision on whether or not you want to do this yourself. So this particular truck is a 1974 GMC C2500 or 3/4 ton. It's got the 14 bolt rear end with the 10.5 inch ring gear, drum brakes, all that good stuff. So what I wanted to do was to take the leaf pack that should be right here. It's an 8+1 leaf pack, so 9 leaves altogether. And I wanted to replace the bushings in both the leaf springs and the leaf spring shackles. So what I did to start off first was I took everything off of the rear axle. So I took off the drive shaft right here, and you can see I bungee corded it up like that, got that out of the way. And then I removed the shocks from the rear axle. I left the bolts in the shock mount itself so I don't lose them. Knowing my luck, I would probably lose them. And then removed the rear brake line, and let's see, what else did I do? Oh, and the emergency brake cables right there. Took out those emergency brake cables. So basically disconnected everything from the rear axle. That's the very first thing you do. It's a lot easier to do it while it's still up in the truck. If you want to do it differently, that's fine. And then from that point, the main goal is to jack up the truck high enough so that you can remove the rear axle. It needs to be up pretty high. Now, if you were to take one of these jack stands, ones that we probably have around our own shop, they're not going to be tall enough. And you're going to find that out pretty quick. Even if you put this jack stand down on the ground and jacked it all the way up to the highest setting, it's still not tall enough. There's going to be about a 3-inch difference there. So you can have two different options. You can either get the bigger jack stands, which for me, Amazon was about the only place that carried it. That's about a $60 to $80 expense, depending on what jack stand I went with. Or the cheapest option is to go to your local lumber yard and get some 2x12s, and they can be just the shitty type of 2x12s that nobody's going to buy. Usually the lumber yard will give you a deal on it. That's what my lumber yard did. And cut them into, that's about what, a 1 foot chunk, something like that, at least big enough to where it covers the entire footprint of the jack stand. Now I took 2 6-foot long pieces of 2x12 and I cut them up into chunks. So there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pieces of wood there, and that seemed to be just about good enough to jack up the truck sufficiently. Now for the jack point in particular, where you want to put your jack stand is, if I can try to get this in the right position, I know you probably can't see shit, but you want to put it as close to the front hanger as you possibly can. Do not try to put it closer to the front of the truck. It will throw off the balance and you risk the truck falling off the jack stands. That's something you do not want to have happen, especially when you are under the son of a bitch. It'll crush you. So just be careful about it. This is probably about the best way I could have thought to jack it up. So that's what I did. Now for the rear axle itself. While it was still up in the truck, I jacked up the rear differential just tall enough to where it'll take off the tension on the leaf spring. So the leaf spring was going right across there. I jacked up the rear axle just to take the pressure off of everything so that I can undo the U-bolts. The U-bolts look like this. Okay, it's a bolt in a U-shaped, just like that. This is the old one. There are 2 of them per side. Now, I can tell you right now, if you have air tools, use those air tools. It is very helpful for rusty, crusty old U-bolts like this. I did it by hand. It was a pain in the ass, but if you use enough PB Blaster and you let it soak, there's my PB Blaster and the leaves over there. soak everything down. So add that step into it. Before you even begin to jack anything up or disconnect anything, look at all the bolts that are in your hangers and your shackles, your bushings, soak those down with PB Blaster too, and the U-bolts and the nuts, soak them down with PB Blaster. That is probably the #1 thing that's going to help you to disassemble everything. Okay, so let's say you don't have air tools. I didn't have air tools. So I took this breaker bar, which actually belongs to my dad. Thanks, Dad. And I used this in a cheater pipe to break loose all of the U-bolt nuts. Now this particular U-bolt for this 3/4 ton takes a 15/16 nut. 15/16 socket, a deep well socket. You're going to need a deep well, preferably something with a 1/2-inch drive on it. I had a 15/16 deep well, but it was a 3/8. I tried to use my Harbor Freight breaker bar for that, and the son of a bitch fell apart just looking at the nuts itself. They just will not cut the mustard, I guess you could say. So get beefier equipment. Get a 1/2-inch drive socket, then a 1/2-inch drive breaker bar, and lots of PB Blaster, and you will get these nuts loose. It'll take a while, but it will work. You're gonna hear a lot of creaking and groaning. That's normal. It's better to try to get these nuts loose than to cut them off with a cutoff wheel or a Sawzall. It's that much harder. So if you can get these unscrewed with air tools or by hand, that's the best way to do it. Okay. Meanwhile, while you're unbolting everything, you still have the jack stand up underneath the rear differential. Once those U-bolts are loosened, you take out the U-bolts. You will take out the top shackle, or the top plate, whatever you want to call that. That's going to sit right on top of the leaf spring. Okay, you're going to go ahead and remove that. And then you're going to be able to drop out this whole rear differential. Now you have two choices. You can either take the tires off like I did, if you plan on just dropping it straight down onto the ground. I wanted to do that because I am working outside and I knew there was going to be rain, and I didn't want rain to just get this whole rear axle wet, so I wanted to give it some cover, so I just dropped it directly onto the ground. That seemed to help. If you're working in a shop, I highly recommend you leave the wheels and tires on the axle. That way, when you remove the U-bolts, you can just scoot the whole rear axle backwards away from the truck, and it'll give you more room. Okay. And there's a cat. Okay. Hi, Soki. So once that's all done and up out of the way, you're going to take your leaf pack. Here's my leaf pack right here. Watch out, Riley. She wants to help. Here's your leaf pack. You'll notice that there is a bolt going right down into the middle. Come on, watch out, scoot. There's a bolt going right down the middle. Normally there is a center pin that goes straight through all these different leaves. On this particular leaf spring pack, mine was 3/8 of an inch wide, and it was about 4 inches long. I can tell you now, if you plan on taking apart your leaves and replacing the wear pads that go right here, it is going to be a bitch to remove that center pin and that nut. Again, take your PB Blaster, PB Blast all of that. The bolts that go up here, you want to soak those down with PB Blaster too. Before you take apart your leaf springs, and this is something that I kind of learned the hard way, this is one piece of advice I will give. Before you do any of that, remove the bushings, okay? On these leaf springs, you're going to have an inner sleeve, then you're going to have a rubber bushing, and then you're going to have an outer sleeve that goes directly, makes contact directly with that eye. The inner sleeve and the bushing, the best way to do it, look it up on YouTube if you want more ideas. What I did for mine was I drilled it out as best as I could with my drill bit, and then took my map torch, torched the hell out of it. Once it starts to sizzle, the rubber and the inner sleeve should just fall out. Hopefully, ideally it should just fall out, and then you're left with the inner sleeve. Okay, and then you can drive that out with a chisel, a cold chisel, or a punch, or whatever you have on hand. That's the way to do it. What I would have done differently, unless you have a really strong vise The bushings and the shackles are very hard to push out with the shackle detached from the leaf springs. So in other words, what I would have done is left everything together like that with the bolts and everything still in it, and then use the weight of the leaf spring to help drive out the bushing. So before you remove the shackle from the actual leaf spring, I would recommend you take all the bushings out, including the shackle first, and then you can disassemble everything like that. So just a heads up. Let's see if I can show which one here. This one shackle I tried to take out with a regular chisel. I know that's really hard to see. Okay, but what happened was I kind of nicked the inside of it, and that might happen. If that does happen, you're going to want to take a rat tail file, some sort of abrasive, and go in there and try to knock down all the high spots. You're not going to get it completely 100% perfect, but that's just the way to do it. You want to try not to have any sharp edges before you put in your new bushings. Something very important that I forgot to mention. Notice how these hangers are set up. So this one is pretty easy. You'll notice that, if I can get a pointer in here, the bolt is going to go in that way, and the nut is going to go behind that. So it's easy to have a breaker bar with the right sized socket, and for these bolts, it is a 13/16 socket for the bolt head, and then a 7/8 box end wrench on the other side for the pinch nut. I have no idea why they did that. If somebody has an idea of why GM did that, it is a 13/16 bolt head and then a 7/8 in the back. Those are easy to get that way if you soak it down with PV Blaster. On the other hand, take a look at the front hanger. Try to get as best light as I can. Notice how the nut sits within a recess between that hanger. So your wrench is going to have to go into that recess. Now the bed is still on this truck. As you can see, there's still a bed on this, right? It'll be a lot easier if the bed's taken off. If it is not taken off, like in this case, you have one of two options. You can either find a 7/8 stubby, which good luck with that. I tried 3 different tool suppliers and none of them carried a 7/8. Amazon had a whole set for like 50 bucks. I didn't want to pay that much for one wrench. Or the other option is to find an old 7/8 box end wrench, either at your local pawn store or even a cheap one over at Harbor Freight, and you're going to cut it in half. Okay, and then you're going to use the box end side of that wrench, and that's what you're going to put on the nut right on the inside of that. In other words, there is no way you can fit a full length 7/8 wrench in that space. There's no way it can happen. I've heard of some people going in there with a crow's foot, and the crow's foot apparently works. I don't know how they managed to do that, but it's much easier just to either get a stubby or just cut off an old 7/8 wrench. Okay, so keep that in mind. You're going to need a tool like that. Either make the tool or find a 7/8 stubby. You might know somebody that has one. Great. But you're not going to be able to remove that nut and bolt unless you have that tool. Okay? All right. So going back to the leaf springs. This is a long-ass video, I know, but I'm trying to cram in as much detail as I possibly can. So like I said, this is an 8+1 leaf spring pack. So you have the large leaf down here at the bottom. This is what sits on the axle itself. And then you have a center pin that goes right down into the middle. Before you even take all this apart, you want to gather the necessary tools. Actually, the necessary parts. You probably already have all the tools. But you're going to need new wear pads, and those are the black things there that go between the leaves. There are 6 wear pads per leaf pack, so you're going to need 12 in total, at least for this 3/4 ton. If you want a good source of where to get those leaf pads, comment down below or PM me or whatever you want to do, and I can show you exactly where I got them. They're pretty cheap, but they do take a while to get here because they come in from Michigan. Down here, that is a lower wear pad. Now, here's what I had to do. Here's the old wear pad that came off of it. You can see it's all rusty, crusty. I probably wouldn't reuse it. If you were in a pinch, I'd say go for it. Why not? But these are damn near impossible to find. So what I do is I took this piece of plastic and I went down to my local plastic supply and got just, this is considerably thicker. This is probably about an 1/8 inch. Okay, but this was the thinnest I can find unless I went online. And again, if you can do it that way, great. If you can find the right size, use it. I was in a hurry to get all this stuff put back together because it's starting to get cold and rainy. But you get a piece of plastic and you cut it out to the right size. Doesn't have to be perfect. You can see, looks like Stevie Wonder cut this one out, but that's okay. It's going in between leaves. Nobody's going to hardly see it. Then you're going to take a 3/8 drill bit and drill out the very center of that piece of plastic. Okay, use a sharp drill bit with a piece of wood behind it. That's about the easiest way I can figure out how to cut it. If you want better cut lines for a piece of plastic this thick, I was told by the plastic people at the shop that if you had a very fine tooth blade table saw, you can cut it a lot more evenly. I didn't want to go through all that trouble, so I just got a fine tooth hacksaw blade and then just cut it out the best I could with a hacksaw blade, and it works okay. Again, nobody's going to see the son of a bitch. It's sandwiched in between all the leaf springs, so it's up to you. You can get as crazy with it as you want, whatever. Okay, another thing about hardware. A lot of people ask, should I reuse my old hardware? I'm going to tell you right now. I used to think, yeah, why not reuse the old hardware? Who gives a shit, right? I highly recommend you don't, because if you look carefully, if my cell phone can focus, which it isn't, okay, there is a wear spot. That wear spot is where it was sitting on the axle. Over time, that wear spot will grow and it'll create cracks all along where it sits on the axle. Not to mention, the threads are pretty rusted and crusty and just, I mean, they're just chewed up to shit, right? So I don't recommend you reuse these. Here's what I did. I myself, I live in the Yakima area of Washington State, and in Yakima they have a place called the White Front Shop. They specialize in things like axles and leaf springs and coil springs and all that good stuff, and they have a bender in their shop where they custom bend all of their U-bolts, and it's much cheaper to do that than go through somebody like LMC where you're having to second guess if they're going to be the right ones. What I did was I took my old U-bolt, took it down to the White Front Shop, gave it to them, and I said, can you just bend me new ones? And they said, sure, no problem. They got it done in about 10 minutes. And it's a pretty nice investment. So yes, I do recommend you get new U-bolts. They are available. Look around your local area and support your small business. These guys were very knowledgeable. They knew exactly what kind of U-bolt I needed. And they even let me sit there and watch them bend it. It's just pretty cool. Okay, so, and then it even comes with the nuts. And it comes with new washers. So they just threw in the whole program and I'm set to go. For everything else, you're going to want new bolts for your hangers. And you're going to want new bolts for basically everything, including these bolts here. I'm not sure what you call that, a saddle bracket. Okay, you're going to need new bolts for that. This is what they look like. I knew I had them around here close. So the old ones look like this. It's got this sleeve, and this sleeve is damn near hard to find. So do not throw these away. You can clean them up and spray paint them, which is what I plan on doing. And then just get new grade 8 bolts to put in between them. The best way I knew how to do this was just take all your old hardware, go to your hardware store, get grade 8 bolts like this at your hardware store. The downside to that, when you're talking about bolts for your hangers, like this guy here, okay, if you go down to your hardware store, you're not going to find a grade 8 bolt this same length. I believe this was a 4.5 inch length. Hi, Riley. It's a 4.5 inch length, and they don't have it. It goes from 4 inches all the way up to 5. So that was an issue. I could not find the right length of bolt. So what I did, watch out, Riley. So what I did was I went down to Tacoma Screw, which is my local fastener depot retail store, and I got the right length of bolts. I just took in my old bolt. I said, hey, I need, that would be 6 of them all together because there's 3 per side. And I just got these and they have the right size. You want to use grade 8. Do not skimp out and get grade 5. They will snap, they will bend, they will break. Don't use grade 5, use grade 8, like these guys here. Okay, so that's where I am currently at. By the way, one last thing really quick. Chances are your center pin for this leaf spring pack is going to be completely damaged. It's going to be rusted. It's going to be a pain in the ass to get off. Before you take this spring pack apart, you're going to take 2 C-clamps. Put a C-clamp here, put a C-clamp here. Clamp everything together as best as you can. Then you can take the nut off the top of the center pin bolt. When you do that, you want to be very careful when you unscrew your C-clamps, okay? And just make sure that it doesn't come flying back out at you. I've seen people take apart these bolts without some sort of a C-clamp, and these leaf springs will fly apart directly at your face, and these are heavy ass leaf springs, so don't do that. Chances are you're going to need a new center pin bolt. Let me get some new ones out here, I'll show you. So from the same people that I got my wear pads from, I also went ahead and I got new leaf spring bolts. They come in different sizes, like 5/16, 3/8, ½ inch, depends on what size you need. For the 74 3/4 ton, these are all 3/8 type bolts. So this is a 3/8 center pin bolt. It is 6 inches long. They are not hardened, so you need to be careful when you tighten these down. You will strip the bolts. And of course, being 6 inches long, you're going to need to cut it. I would recommend putting in the center pin bolt first, tightening everything down with your C-clamps on both sides, tightening everything down to where it needs to be, and then you can figure out how much you need to cut off on the end. Use a hacksaw or cut-off wheel, whatever you want to use. I also highly recommend, for every single fastener you use, get yourself some anti-seize. This, again, is your best friend when it comes to reassembly. That goes for the center pin bolt, all the bolts for the leaf springs, the bushings, the saddle bracket. You want to make sure you use enough anti-seize. If you ever need to take these apart again, you're going to thank yourself for doing that. If you want, when you take apart your leaf springs, you can do what I did. More than likely, all your leaf springs are going to be covered in rust and dirt and all sorts of crap. Take a... see if I can find it here. Take a this here is a wire cut brush and go all up and down your leaf springs, clean them up as best you can, and then just put a coat or 2 of spray paint. I used some of that Krylon flat enamel for rusty stuff, and that seems to work okay. If you want a better video of somebody doing this from start to end, let me know. There is somebody on YouTube that does this to a K30 Chevy. It's all the same thing. So it's same process. Take apart the leaf springs, remove all the bolts, all that stuff. But it's a good video to watch too. So that was a long ass fucking video. But I just kind of wanted to show exactly what I did to get to this point. If you have any other questions, let me know in the comments. I'd be more than happy to answer them. And yeah, square body on, people.